Hey y'all, it's me, Dri. So I think this week we're going to get a little personal. Not too personal, but I think that we can go a little deeper. So this week I experienced something I honestly didn't even think existed. I experienced something that I never even considered I would experience in my lifetime. My parents came into town to visit, and for the first time that I can ever remember, I felt emotionally safe around them for their whole entire trip. And I know for some people that probably sounds like a normal sentence. Your parents come into town, you spend a few days together, you run some errands, you go out and eat, you help each other make a few decisions, and then they go home. No big deal, right? Not in my world, because my relationship with my parents has never felt that simple to me. And I don't know what the reason is, but my dynamic with them has always been one of the most emotionally loaded dynamics that I have had in my lifetime. You see, being around my parents has historically meant me bracing. And when I say bracing, I mean my body preparing for something to happen before anything had even happened. My body preparing to be misunderstood, preparing to be judged, preparing to be treated like I was still a child. I would prepare for a disagreement. I would prepare for my dad's intensity. I would prepare for my mom's anxiety. I would prepare to explain myself. I would prepare to defend myself. I would prepare to leave the room, and I would always prepare to shut down. I would always prepare to become somebody else so that I can make it through the interaction without everything falling apart, because that's just how tumultuous of a family that we are. And because that had been the pattern that we just simply operated in for so long, for my whole life, I honestly did not think there was even a possibility to ever experience a different kind of existence with my parents. But yeah, so they came into town for the weekend. They were here for 4 full days, and everything about their visit here was different. And that's not because they arrived as entirely different people. No. I've been thinking about it, and all I can think is that something was different inside of me this time. Because for 4 days, I stayed in my body. I stayed present. I stayed regulated. And I did not have to keep disappearing into another room to recover from being around them. I didn't feel that I needed incessant breaks. I didn't feel stuck to my phone for a distraction. I just did not have to take any long breaks to bring myself back down from an elevated state. And I did not spend their entire visit analyzing every tone, every facial expression, every comment, or even every moment that could possibly turn into a conflict. I was just there with them. And there was one moment when I could feel myself becoming emotionally charged up in a situation with them. It was at the beginning of their trip, and everybody was moving forward in one direction, and I just hung back a little bit just to take a second for myself. My dad asked me why I was not following along with them, and I said, I just need a second, Dad. And he was like, for what? And I said, I need to regulate. And he asked me while he laughed what that even meant. And I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? I mean my emotions. Like, it's very important that you regulate. And he was like, that's a good one. I'm going to use that one. I've never heard that before. And I mean, honestly, he thought it was funny. And when I think about it, like, it felt like a lighthearted moment where my dad saw me, and the old me would have taken that moment and would have heard that same exact response, that same exact tone, and it would have pulled me completely outside of myself. I might have felt embarrassed, or I might have felt diminished, dismissed. I might have immediately started defending why what I was doing is important. I may have needed him to understand the seriousness of the level at which I was bothered in the situation for even taking a time out to begin with. Or most likely, I probably would have just pushed my emotions down and followed along with everybody anyway, even though I needed a second, and then I would simply become overwhelmed the next time I had to open my mouth. And you guys, the things that come out of my mouth when I'm activated and charged up, like, that is nothing that anybody wants to see. But I didn't need my dad to understand what I meant when I said I needed to regulate. And I did not need for him to take it seriously. It actually probably helped that he saw it a little bit funny, because regardless of him, I knew what I needed in that moment. So I just hung back, and he hung back with me, and we talked, and while we did, I regulated my emotions. And then he and I rejoined the group. There was no fight. There was no shutdown. There was no big explosion. And most of all, there was no lingering resentment. A moment came. I took care of what I needed to take care of to control myself. And as soon as I did that, the moment passed. And this may sound really small, you guys, but for me, it was huge. Because for the first time, I did not abandon myself just because somebody else did not understand what I was doing. I stayed with myself. And for the first time, me staying with myself did not raise a conflict within the dynamic at which I was sitting in. And the craziest thing is that I stayed with myself, and I did what I needed to do for me, and the entire dynamic of the group is stayed intact. Now, just for some backstory, the main reason my parents came into town was because we were handling a car situation. My youngest daughter is about to turn 17, and I've been planning to give her my car for her birthday. So I needed to get another car. And let me tell you, buying a car with my parents should have been one of the most triggering experiences we could have possibly chosen to do together. Because, I mean, think about it. You're buying a car. There is money involved. There is credit involved. There is a major decision involved. There are opinions involved. Every single person has their own. There was a finance department to overcome. There was my dad asking questions that we had already visited and answered, and then him wanting to have an opinion after the fact. There was my mom getting nervous every single time he chimed in, and there was me trying to figure out how much I was really comfortable spending. I've never bought a car with both of my parents in tow. Like, my mom and I could probably get that done pretty easily, but oh my gosh, my dad around for it, talking about money and contracts. That was an explosion waiting to happen. I mean, basically every ingredient that had historically created conflict with us in my whole entire life was sitting right there over that 4-day window that I had with my parents. And somehow we managed the whole 4 days. We did not fight at all. Not once. I had originally decided, since my parents were involved, and because, I mean, it is what it is, like, I just decided I should be humble. So we were shopping for days at every single dealer you could think of, and I found this Lexus. It was reasonably priced. It was 7 years old. But it was still a Lexus. It was nice. It had low miles. It was a reasonable purchase. And I thought, maybe this is what I should choose. Like, let's just sit with the more reasonable option. I don't want anybody to think that I'm asking for too much. And honestly, like, payment shock, like, I just paid off the car that I was giving to my daughter, so I wanted to make sure that going into another payment that I was going to be saving money overall. And I just felt, for the first time going into buying a car, to be humble. And, you know, I'm looking at this Lexus, and they come out because it's time in the journey to do the test drive. And I get into the driver's seat, and I was like, you guys, like, get in this car, let's go for a drive. And my mom just looks at it, and she comes over to the window of the passenger seat, and she opens the door and puts her head in, and she essentially said, Adrian, absolutely not. And in that moment, my mother, she upsold me. She insisted that we go back and look at this Genesis that was double the price. And I mean, she is the whole reason that I ended up driving away in that car. And I need you all to really understand why this mattered to me, because I was not asking my mother to convince me that I deserved a better car. I had already built this life where I can manage the payment. I had already done the work that needed to be done. I have opened this business, and it's going remarkably well, and I have created capacity in my life for the car, which is the only reason we were visiting it in the first place. But regardless of that, there was still a big part of me that was preparing to have to make myself smaller in front of my parents. And in that moment, looking at that Lexus, instead of my mom reinforcing all the reasons that I should shrink, my mom encouraged me to expand. She did not judge the price. She did not shame the decision. She did not make me feel like I was reckless for wanting something beautiful that I could be proud in. She looked at me and she essentially said, "Go get the better car, Adrian." And then when we got into the finance department, my mom actually even decided to sign the contract so that I could get a better payment than I would have qualified for. And that is a big stretch for my mom. They are very old-fashioned, and she is a gatekeeper of her credit. And for her to even put that on the table without me asking, there was no long speech about what a big deal her credit was. There was no reminder about the obligation she would be taking on if I failed. There was no emotional weight placed on me for accepting her help in that moment. And she just helped me. And for the first time in my life, there was a moment where my mom was helping me. And my dad, her husband, was sitting right next to her. And it was fine. And then she did one bigger, and because it was my daughter's birthday and we were trying to really just make it a good car conscious decision, my mom put a big chunk of change down on my car so that I could get my payment just a little bit more reasonable. She wanted everything to be perfect so that giving my daughter this car for my birthday, for her birthday, there was just nothing to look back on and regret. So she really came in big and made the transaction so good, and like it just made me awestruck. I think that was one of the most emotional parts of my entire weekend with them, because I was receiving support from my parents without feeling like I had to become smaller in order to deserve it. I did not feel like I was being rescued because I had failed. And I definitely was not being treated like a child who couldn't make her own decisions. I was there with my parents, and I was an adult woman making a big purchase, and my parents were simply there to support me fully. And for the first time in my life, the feeling that that gave me, I felt like their daughter. For the first time, I did not feel like the troubled child. I did not feel like the emotional child. I didn't feel like the child that couldn't make good choices and had major life interruptions because of it. No, I wasn't the one whose choices needed to be monitored this weekend. I didn't have to defend any of my decisions. I was just there, and I was their daughter. And I just felt like my parents had come into town to help me buy a car, and that was it. And something so normal just felt so incredibly big. I don't think I realized how deeply I have wanted something that normal until I was finally inside of it. And there was another moment while they were here too that surprised me. I needed to record a tarot reading for this channel, and I've been staying pretty consistent with that, so I didn't want, because my parents were in town, to break up my routine. And as most of y'all know, like, I grew up in a very devout Catholic household, and my parents, my family, they're very conservative, and they believe what they believe. And so when it comes to my tarot cards, I have always assumed that they would never really be able to see beyond the cards. And I don't know. I know that the readings that I do are good, and I know the time that I invest in my practice is beneficial for me in so many ways. And I know the intention behind my work. And I also know that the messages that I deliver every single day help people, which is why I continue to do them. And I know that I use my tarot cards to create language around emotional experiences that people may not have been able to understand on their own without them. And I know what I do with my tarot cards. It comes from a place of love. But I have still always assumed that my parents would only see the tarot cards. And because of that, there was a part of me that expected I would always have to keep this part of my life separate from them. But in spite of my feelings about that, I did not hide what I needed to do this weekend. And I recorded a full 20-minute tarot reading while my parents were sitting in the next room waiting for me to finish. I spoke in my normal voice. I delivered the message the same way I always do. I did not minimize it. I did not sanitize my process. And I did not wait until they left to do it. For the first time with my parents, I let myself be fully seen. And then they listened to the playback, and they told me it was a great message. They actually heard the message. They saw past the cards. And I cannot fully explain what exactly that meant to me, because it's hard to think that you do something that your parents might not approve of, especially when you have a nervous system that wants to orient around them. But because I have already accepted what I do with my craft, in that moment, I did not need their permission to do it. But at the same time, I never expected them to understand it. And this weekend, while they were here, they did not have to understand every part of my spiritual practice. But what they did do is they recognized the good in what I was creating. And more than that, they recognized me. And I think that is where the true breakthrough here actually lives, because for most of my life, I believed I had to leave parts of myself behind in order to remain connected to my parents. I believed my whole life that I had to shrink. I believed that I had to tone myself down, and I believed I had to make my choices more acceptable so that they wouldn't judge or critique me. And I believed I had to hide the parts of myself they might not understand or they might not agree with. I truly believed that I had to step outside of my own body when I was with my parents. I always had to monitor the room and become whatever version of me that was least likely to create conflict. And I just remember that it being like that for my whole life. Always feeling like the black sheep. Always feeling like I was disappointing. But this weekend I did not do or feel any of that. I stayed with myself the whole time. I stayed inside of my body and I regulated my own emotions. I spoke honestly. I let them witness my work. I let myself want to get the car. And I allowed myself to receive their help. I did not spend 4 days dragging the past into every present moment. And that part surprised me too, because usually when things get good with your parents, you want to start griping about all the things that are wrong. And of course, there are always going to be grievances. There are always going to be things that I have resented as I have come along my way. But there have also been moments that I wanted my parents to understand them differently. There have always been experiences I wanted them to acknowledge their wrongdoing, their part. And in the past, being around my parents, that could bring all of that resentment right back to the surface so easily if they just say the wrong thing. It could feel like I needed to rehash and revisit all the history again. Like I needed to understand why I responded the way I did. Or like I needed to present evidence for everything that I have been carrying. But not this time. Expressing my grievances this time did not feel necessary. And again, that's not because grievances have not happened. No. It's not because the past suddenly became acceptable in my eyes. No. And it's not because I no longer remembered the past. No. I know what happened. I know how it affected me. And I know what I will accept now. And I know what I will not accept now. And I've come to a place where I do not need to keep reopening the case in order to trust my own truth. And I've been thinking about it, and I'm really starting to think that because I finally trusted myself around the past, and in the moment, I was able to experience my parents in the present time. The resentment, it did not need to be suppressed, because the resentment, it's dissolved. I feel completely reconciled. And that's not reconciled in the same way that every old wound had been perfectly discussed and repaired with my parents. No. I feel reconciled in the sense that I no longer need the present to keep reenacting the past. I'm just ready to be present and to let the past be the past. And then there's one other moment that I want to share with you guys that happened right after we bought this car. And it really showed me how much things have shifted. My mom and I were driving home separately from my dad, and she told me, man, in that finance office, I just felt like a wreck. My heart was racing. She said that she felt like she was in big trouble or had broken a law or something. And it was my dad that was making her feel that way. And I told her, Mom, what you are feeling is bracing. That's that physical feeling where your body is preparing for an emotional impact. When you brace, your heart starts racing. Your body tightens. You feel inside like you're being accused, even if no one has directly accused you of anything. And you feel like a child that's in trouble, even though you have done nothing wrong. And I told her that I had too experienced that feeling of bracing around my dad for most of my life. And I did tell her that when he becomes passive aggressive and in an attempt to protect her, because of course his intentions are always good, but what happens is when he gets passive aggressive to protect her, it does not actually make her feel protective. What it does is it makes her nervous system feel unsafe. And I encouraged her on our car ride to explain that to my dad, because if she explained it to him correctly, of course he would understand and naturally try to adjust course. And maybe this feeling that I've witnessed her feeling my whole life, maybe that could change. And what is so interesting about that conversation is I didn't feel in that moment that I was talking from the position of a triggered little child. No, I was not trying to convince my mother to take my side. No. And I was definitely not using her experience as an opportunity to unload any grievances I had ever held against my father. No. I was fully regulated. I could recognize the pattern as soon as she communicated it. I could name it. I could explain to her what it was and why it was happening and what it meant. And then I could let it all go. And I think that my ability to regulate has changed the entire atmosphere of my time with my parents. It was like my parents could sense that I was not bracing. And because of that, they did not brace either. I was not entering every interaction expecting to be attacked. So they did not feel like they needed to defend themselves. And I was not carrying a collection of old grievances into every conversation. So each and every present moment, it all had room to become something new. And that does not mean that I am responsible for regulating everyone around me. No. It also does not mean my parents are going to respond perfectly every time just because I am more grounded now. But I do think that our nervous system communicates with each other. And I think that when one person stops participating in an old pattern, the whole pattern has an opportunity to change. You see, my parents were not interacting with the version of me who was preparing to fight for her adulthood. They were interacting with an adult woman who already knew who she was. And because I knew who I was, this weekend I did not need to convince anybody of it. Certainly not my parents. I did not need to demand that they see me differently or they compensate for any wrongdoing. I simply showed up in the dynamic differently. And what happened is they responded to the person who was standing in front of them. And the most unexpected part of the whole weekend with my parents was that when it ended and it was time for them to leave, I genuinely felt sad. I was genuinely sad that my parents were leaving. I was not counting down the minute for when they were going to depart. Being sad about my parents leaving has never been my experience. In the last 7 years, usually interacting with them felt like pulling teeth. I was in a version of me that wasn't comfortable pretending to be what I thought they wanted me to be and not being me. My body used to be so exhausted after their visits. There would be relief when I got my space back. Relief when I no longer had to monitor the emotional temperature of everybody in the room. But this time, this trip, I think for one of the very few times in my life, I really thoroughly enjoyed my parents. Both of them together at the same exact time. It felt like a little glimpse of Leave It to Beaver. So normal and perfect and right. I really did. I enjoyed having my parents in my home. I enjoyed all of it. I really enjoyed being their daughter. And now they're gone and I do miss them. I am 44 years old, and for the first time in my life, I can say that I felt emotionally safe around both of my parents. And that's not because I finally learned how to perform the perfect version of their child. And it's not because I became quieter. And it's not because I asked for less. It's not because I hid what I believed, and it's not because I swallowed my feelings, and it's not because I abandoned myself to preserve my relationship with them, but actually I felt safe with them because I stayed with myself the whole entire time. And now, somehow, I'm just realizing that the more fully I stay with myself, the more fully others are able to receive me. And this was a part I never expected, because I always thought connection required compromise. And I always thought there is healthy compromise in every relationship. But the old me, she confused compromise with self-abandonment. She thought belonging required her to step outside of herself. She thought acceptance required her to become easier to accept. But yeah, this past weekend showed me something completely different with the two very people I thought that change was not possible with. And for the first time that I can remember, I did not have to shrink to be loved. I did not have to leave my body to stay connected. And I did not have to betray myself to belong to my family. I just stayed fully. And remarkably, I felt more received than I have ever felt before. The love that I felt from my parents is so much greater than any love I had ever carried with me before. So maybe healing is not always about finally getting the apology. I'm thinking maybe reconciliation is not always one big dramatic conversation where every wound is named and every question gets answered. No. I'm getting that sometimes reconciliation is knowing what happened, trusting yourself about it, honoring the boundaries it taught you, and no longer needing the present to keep proving that the past was real. Sometimes healing is walking into the most historically triggering situation that you can remember and realizing in it that your body does not live there anymore. Sometimes it's buying the car, recording the tarot reading anyways, taking that 1 second to regulate before returning to the room. Sometimes it can be accepting the help, enjoying your parents, and then realizing that nothing bad happened because you stayed with yourself while you did. And that, in fact, staying with yourself may have been the very thing that finally allowed everyone else to meet you right exactly where you were. I don't know. I think that what I am carrying forward from this whole weekend is that the right relationships are not going to require you to disappear. The people who truly love y'all do not need a smaller version of y'all. And even relationships with a complicated history can sometimes become something brand new. And it all happens when we stop abandoning ourselves in anticipation of the old outcomes. I didn't get my childhood back this weekend, but I did get something I never experienced before. I got to really feel like a daughter, a real daughter, an adult daughter, or even better, a fully expressed daughter. I was a daughter who could regulate herself, make her own damn decisions, receive support without feeling bad, share my work, speak my truth, and remain completely inside of myself while I did it. And as I embraced myself, my family embraced me. Not in spite of who I was, but while being fully who I am. And after 44 years of bracing, I finally know what it feels like to stay. And that's what I have for y'all today. So if this one landed, then I invite you to let me know in the comments. Let me know how your regulation is playing out in real life. Because when it does, you surely notice it. And it is so awe-striking in itself. Remember, where there's love, there's light. I'll see y'all again real soon.